Welcome to this webinar brought to you by the APO Center of Excellence on Public Sector Productivity. I am Magdalena Mendoza, Fellow of the Development Academy of the Philippines. In this session, we are going to have an introduction to public sector productivity. This is the outline of my presentation. First, I will define public sector productivity and related concepts. Second, I will discuss why did productivity become an important consideration for the public sector. And third, I will talk about the public sector productivity movement in the Philippines. Let's start by reviewing the basic concepts of public sector productivity. In the screen, we see the traditional production model of performance, the causal chain of inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes. Like other entities, the public sector is expected to produce societal outcomes like peace and order or vital economic activities and the well-being of its citizens. Such outcomes are realized over time through the production of certain outputs like law enforcement or assistance to enterprises or provision of health and services. But in order to deliver those outputs, we need inputs. For instance, for law enforcement, you need the police force, or for education services, you need teachers, and for health, you need medical personnel, and of course, equipment and facilities. Now, productivity in its very technical sense is simply defined as the ratio of outputs to the input or outputs produced by a given organization divided by the inputs used to produce them. For instance, the number of violators apprehended by the police is divided over the resources used to do that. Or the number of patients treated in a government hospital to compute productivity is divided by the inputs used to provide the medical treatment. But what is public sector productivity really about? Firstly, it is doing more with less. When used in the public sector, productivity indicates how efficiently public resources are employed in providing services. It is said that if a given organization is able to increase its outputs, that is, the policies that it produces or the services that the organization is able to deliver over time, and at the same time maintain or reduce resources employed to produce such outputs, it will achieve significant productivity gains. Second, productivity is also a means of producing quality outputs. It is said that a productive organization, similarly, is one that turns out a high level of good quality product with its resources. Thirdly, public sector productivity is about restoring public trust. The productivity field provides the means of improvement and restoration of confidence in the government by giving the public its money's worth in terms of efficient and effective services. Productivity is a means operating on the basis of genuine work ethic and keener sense of public accountability. But in a broader sense, public sector productivity can be viewed as a means of enhancing effectiveness of the public sector in creating a conducive environment to increase total factor productivity in private sector production and in generating greater impact on the well-being of citizens. In other words, public sector productivity is about good governance. The quality of the public sector governance is conceived by the international community as a condition sine qua non for development. Let us now discuss some related concepts. For instance, productivity and corruption. Corruption is a big issue in the public sector, whether it is actually happening or may be perceived only by the public. In many studies of corruption and its consequences, experts find that productivity is inversely related to corruption, and that productivity and good governance are inextricably linked. It would be recalled that productivity evolved from a simple moral concern to improve government by eradicating corruption. No? It was widely believed at the time, and not unreasonably so, that among the reformers of the 19th century, the elimination of political corruption was the essential first step in attaining governmental efficiency and effectiveness. No. The reformers said that if governments were grossly inefficient and ineffective, then probably these governments are likely or were likely to be corrupt as well. Now, the consequence of corruption is low public sector productivity. Or we can say that low productivity can be symptomatic of corruption or something going wrong in the public sector. The basic thinking then was that if a program's productivity is low, no, the program could be ill-conceived, unworkable, poorly managed. It is likely that that program has been corrupted. Now, another related concept to productivity is ethics. How do ethics and productivity intersect? It is said that productivity is about doing things right. And doing things right is also associated with efficiency. While effectiveness is about doing the right things, but when you are doing what is right, even if no one is watching, it is ethics. Productivity and ethics are reciprocally integral to success. Doing the right thing is the purpose of an organization, and doing things right is the means to achieve that purpose. Now that we are clear about productivity, who do you think will benefit from high productivity in the public sector? Of course, we have the general public, the business sector, the elected officials, the public employees, and also public managers. The general public will benefit from more efficient and effective use of taxes and other public resources from high productivity. Business, or those transacting with government, will benefit from improved services, reduced time and cost of transacting with government. Elected officials also benefit from high productivity, especially from efficiently and effectively operated or delivered public services, which the general public expects and appreciates. Public employees, or those working in government, will also benefit from productivity, from more and more efficient technology and work processes, more pleasant work conditions, and potential share of productivity gains. And lastly, public managers can produce anticipated results due to better control over resources, workforce, and processes, thus achieving overall productivity. Now, why has productivity become an important consideration in the public sector? Why is it very important? There are three important reasons. Firstly, the public sector, especially in developing economies like ours, plays a very important and central role, and oftentimes it is the public sector that serves as the key provider of public services and infrastructure that support the economy. This could include education, health, social welfare, defense, security, and vital infrastructures such as roads, transportation, communication, electricity, water supply, irrigation, which are needed to support the vital economic activities. The public sector must thus deliver these goods in the most efficient, effective, economical, and ethical manner. You look at this picture. This is a common problem in the public sector. What is this? Queuing. People line up to get a service from a government agency. Do you think that the public sector organization providing such service where people have to wait on long queues productive? Here is another picture. You'd see, while there had been improvements in terms of providing a more efficient way to process and provide a better place to transact business, the public sector organization here is unable to cope with the rising demand for public services. Would the adoption of newer technologies like artificial intelligence or probably digital transformation of public services improve productivity performance? Now, the second important reason for highlighting productivity in the public sector is that we know very well that the public sector is the main consumer of public resources and also the biggest spender of public resources. In the slides, you would see that this amount ranges to around 10.6% to at most probably 33% of the gross domestic product as represented by the blue bars in the chart. Since this is mostly tax money, the public sector is thus expected to use these resources prudently. Now here's a common problem. Again, you would see the unfinished construction of a bridge. Do you think that the utilization of public resource for this construction project is productive? As you could see, the money has been spent, but the project is unfinished and the output cannot be used. So far, no public benefit has been derived from this project, and maybe at its current state, it is considered a public bad or a nuisance. Here's another problem. Do you think that the public resources used to procure these garbage trucks, which are supposed to be used to keep public spaces clean, are productive? These trucks are just being kept in a parking lot when we know very well that as designed, they can run for 24 hours per day or 7 days a week. And this equipment will just naturally deteriorate. So what could be a more productive way for a public sector organization providing this kind of service? Should they buy or just rent garbage trucks? Another common problem, public sector is oftentimes guilty of profligate use of resources. Well, you would see here lots of papers and a very disorganized workplace. This is just an indication of very poor management practices and certainly an indication of very low productivity. Now we go to the third reason why it is important to improve public sector productivity. And this is it. Public sector is one of the biggest employers, if not the biggest employer in the country. If a very small organization or a small and medium enterprise were very concerned about the productivity of its workforce, how much more for the public sector, which employs, as in the case of the Philippines, around 1.7 million personnel. So here you would see the percent of total employment. For instance, in the case of Asian countries, this is just around 20 or so, or less than 20%, or in other countries less than 10% of the total employment, but they still represent a sizable number of the workforce of the country, and therefore they need to show or demonstrate productivity. So let us just summarize, why is it important to improve productivity of the public sector? As you mentioned earlier, firstly, it is important to improve productivity of the public sector because, number one, the public sector is the key provider of public services and infrastructure supporting the economy, and they have to do this function in the most efficient, effective, economical, and ethical manner. Secondly, the public sector is the biggest spender of public resources. And since this is tax money, they are expected to use these resources prudently. And thirdly, the public sector is one of the big employers, rather, if not the biggest employer in the country. And with that, it has to demonstrate very high productivity of its workforce. Now, what has been done or what has been happening in the region? Let me first introduce the Asian Productivity Organization. It is an intergovernmental, non-political, non-profit, and non-discriminatory regional organization established in 1961 with a mission to contribute to the socio-economic development of Asia and the Pacific through enhancing productivity. As you can see, there are about 20 member countries, mostly from Asia. And in the Philippines, it is the Development Academy of the Philippines that represents the country to the APO, being the National Productivity Organization of the country. In recent years, the APO has recognized the important role of public sector organizations and the need for the sector to deliver outputs and services more productively. Many national productivity organizations like the DAP are actively and directly involved in enhancing public sector productivity in their respective countries and are witnessing greater demands from the general public for better quality of public services as well as higher productivity in government. Now, based on this paradigm and the priority needs identified by the member countries, the APO prepared its public sector productivity program framework. The framework is a guide for national productivity organization and the public sector in adopting coordinated approaches to raise productivity and improve quality of public service delivery. Through this new program, the APO envisioned that public sector organizations, institutions, and professionals of member countries would be able to demonstrate productivity enhancement, leading to citizen satisfaction and greater public trust, cost effectiveness, and increased accountability in the use of public resources, national competitiveness, and better quality of life. This framework laid out what the national productivity organizations consider as most urgent and relevant to enhance public sector productivity in terms of thematic areas, targets, methods, and expected results. The 5 thematic areas that were adopted reflect the priority for areas of engagement of the APO, and these are service quality, innovation leadership, e-government, regulatory reform, and citizen-centered services. Let me just briefly define the scope of the thematic areas. Here, service quality focuses on achieving service excellence by continuous and incremental improvement in quality of public services. E-government refers to effective use of information and communication technologies in operations of public sector organizations to facilitate and make transactions seamless. Innovation leadership focuses on the creation of more efficient and effective policies as well as services by influencing others in the accomplishment of public tasks. Regulatory reform seeks to improve quality of regulations by removing unnecessary obstacles to competition, innovation, and growth, while ensuring that regulations efficiently serve important social objectives. Citizen-centered services actually is targeted to promote high levels of citizen satisfaction by learning citizens' expectations, measuring service performance, ensuring accountability, and improving the capacity of the public sector. The targets of the APO public sector productivity programs comprise the central and local governments, public service agencies, as well as public enterprises. What has the APO done so far? No? Since 2009, when the APO included in its program thrust public sector productivity, it has initiated many programs to introduce the concept, beginning with a study meeting in Korea in 2009 to talk about the concerns on productivity in the public sector, and then a study mission or a high-level mission of senior officials from APO member countries in Canada to look at how the Canadian public sector introduced productivity or implemented programs to enhance productivity performance of the public sector in 2010, and an experts meeting also during the same year to examine the trends, assess the needs of member countries, and define the scope of public sector productivity. These were followed by many other programs such as workshops and training on results-based management, research on knowledge management and productivity measurement in the public sector, the development of public sector leadership framework, the development of a public sector productivity specialist program and a manual to support that, specialized training on lean management systems, multi-country study missions on innovation and productivity, and more recently about digitization of public services and foresight thinking in the public sector, among others. The APO also designated its Center of Excellence on Public Sector Productivity. In the context of the APO, a Center of Excellence is a formally designated institution or network of institutions in a member country which has a world-class level of competency with exemplary performance and experience in a specific body of knowledge or area that contributes to productivity. In recognition of what the National Productivity Organization in the Philippines, and that is the DAP, has been doing to promote productivity in the public sector, in 2015, the DAP was designated as the APO Center of Excellence on Public Sector Productivity. And as Center of Excellence, it does a lot of programs to promote research on public sector productivity, such as measurements, to provide capability building, to put up a knowledge center on public sector productivity, and also to promote innovation through the public sector innovation laboratories. Now let's talk about the public sector productivity movement in the Philippines. We know very well that productivity in the public sector is a key if the country were to achieve its development goals. In Chapter 5 of the Philippine Development Plan for 2017 to 2022, we aim for a citizen-centered, innovative, clean, efficient, effective, and inclusive delivery of public goods and services. In particular, this chapter aims to reduce corruption, achieve seamless service delivery, enhance administrative governance, strengthen the civil service, and fully engage and empower citizens. In order to realize this, we need to harness productivity of all public sector organizations and also raise the productivity of all public servants. Since the 1980s, the Philippine public sector has been in the path of reforms to raise productivity. The Philippine government recognizes that to achieve its objectives while living up to public expectations, the government or the public sector must increasingly maximize scarce resources, eliminate waste and bureaucratic inefficiency, and hone its responsiveness to the real needs of the public, and operate on the basis of a genuine work ethic and keener sense of public accountability. Now, you would see in the figure the initiatives introduced in the country to improve public sector productivity just from 1990s to present. We organized them into 5 areas. You would see the programs. And these are in the upper part, you would see we described the initiatives, or we enumerated the initiatives towards making government that cost less. Second cluster would be initiatives towards making a quality government. In the third line, you would see the initiatives towards making a digital government. And below the blue line, you would see the initiatives towards having a smart government, as well as an honest, transparent, and professional government. Sometime in 1996 to 1998, we had the first National Action Agenda for Productivity during the time of former President Fidel V. Ramos, which is actually the blueprint for the country's bid for global competitiveness. And in that plan, because of the important role of the public sector in providing direction, the environment, and support to increase overall societal productivity, the NAAP at the time set out an action agenda to improve productivity in the public sector. We hope that we could have an updated national action agenda that will support our medium-term plan, as well as the Ambition 2040. Now, here you would see a number of initiatives. We had in the 80s, before the NAAP, we had the Government Productivity Improvement Program and an adoption of the Japanese Quality Control Circles at the time, which is called the Work Improvement Teams, being introduced in public sector organization. Another milestone is the passage of a law that promoted quality in the public sector, and that is the Philippine Quality Award Act. And similarly, sometime in 2007, an executive order was issued mandating all agencies or instrumentalities of the government to have their quality management system certified under the ISO 9000 standards. And there are many other initiatives such as the procurement reform, the reengineering or rationalization of government agencies to make a government that is more cost effective and yet very relevant. The introduction of computerization, electronic governance system, making smarter government with many reforms such as signature reduction, red tape reduction, introduction of service guides, and more recently the mandated citizens charter in terms of making an honest, transparent, and professional government. We see the investment in the development of capabilities of public officials and employees, as well as the rationalization and introduction of incentives through the results-based performance management system, as well as programs on open government. And we see in more recent years other initiatives that include the national government portal, the freedom of information, capability building for innovative leadership and legislation for the legislative department, the introduction of a program on modernizing government regulation, mandatory satisfaction surveys, mandatory streamlining activities, the introduction of innovation laboratory in the public sector, and researches now on how to measure improvements in productivity in the public sector in a quantitative fashion, as well as studies on how we can harness Industry 4.0 to raise the efficiency of government operations. Now, consider this. In recent years, we had salary standardization part 4, wherein the compensation of public employees has been adjusted substantially, wherein the new salary rates are, as I understand, about 70% of the average compensation of counterparts of our employees in the private sector. Now, with the increase in salaries, do you think that there is a corresponding improvement in employees' productivity performance? That's a question. Because I surmise, I think agencies or even employees or workforce in the public sector just produce the same level of outputs despite the substantial increase in their compensation. Maybe that's not just their fault because we are still bound by old systems and processes, and we continue to operate mainly on a manual basis. There's a limit to manual intervention, but if we can harness the other productivity technologies, we can perhaps realize higher and much higher level of productivity performance. Now, how do we improve public sector productivity? So, let's focus on organizational productivity. No? organizational productivity is actually defined as the capacity of a public sector organization to produce the results expected of it using money, effort, time, information, materials, and other physical resources in the most efficient, effective, yet economical manner. So let's just reiterate that if a government department is able to increase its outputs, and that includes policies and services over time, and at the same time maintain or reduce resources employed, which are the inputs, to produce these policies and services, it will achieve significant productivity gains. One expert actually said that there are two main sources of productivity. The first one is technological progress, and the other is efficiency. By technological progress, it means improvements in technological knowledge to produce larger quantity of outputs from the same level of input. And technological progress means employing new technologies. So in this case, we're saying that technologies associated with Industry 4.0 will have high potential, of improving or dramatically improving productivity in the public sector. The other source of productivity is efficiency. It means the effective combination of inputs and technology through organizational and management improvements, the introduction of competition, scale economies, and incentives. And in the public sector, I think we can maximize this by introducing new management approaches, such as lean management, or maybe introducing competition and incentives for greater performance. Now, there are 5 strategies to improve productivity. This is according to Van der Rijn, Bockert, and Halligan, who are performance experts. The first one is doing more with less. It's like this. Second is doing more with the same. So, the same level of inputs. Doing more with the same. Third, doing much more with more. That is producing more outputs compared to increase in inputs. Fourth, doing the same with less. Same level of output, but in decreasing amount of input. And finally, doing less with much less, but lesser and resources would be needed to produce lesser amount of outputs. Okay, another way by which we can improve productivity is illustrated in this diagram by Dunleavy and Carrera. In this figure, we see the important and distinctive aspects of organizational productivity in the public sector. That is the close connection between productivity and the adoption of innovations inside public sector. Just as technological change has been strong and a vital driver of productivity improvements in private firms, we could also expect that innovations will play key roles in public sector productivity in several ways. So the first one, that is improving the conversion of inputs into outputs, for established activities. For example, reducing the staff or the number of personnel needed to accomplish a task. Second, this is by introduction of new inputs in the production of established outputs. as for instance with the successive back office computer automation of record keeping, which will actually eliminate need for too many personnel and at the same time improve accuracy of recording. The third one is improving productivity using qualitatively new inputs. For example, the deployment of CCTVs to monitor. So if you can consider police stations with CCTVs, they probably wouldn't need so many police force to patrol the area assigned to them because they can do the close monitoring on time using a new input such as the CCTV or cameras. And a fourth strategy would be introducing new outputs. So in this case, our example is creation of an electronic tax forms that can be filled out by taxpayers in the comforts of their home using their own computers, and at the same time making these electronic forms simpler and quicker for people to fill up and submit to the tax agencies. So finally, let me just summarize the scope of public sector productivity. You would see here the representation of the system, and this is actually representing the public sector organization, which has people, processes, and institutional structure, producing core government products, in this case, policies and services, and to improve productivity of this organization, it is actually looking at all the items such as right-sizing the bureaucracy, reskilling its people, re-engineering or reinventing processes, restructuring or redesigning institutional structure, engaging or re-engaging the citizens, and all of these things are actually about rethinking the entire system within a public sector organization. So public sector productivity is really broad. It is not just about the ratio of the output to the input. It is about rethinking the entire public sector service delivery system, or the process by which public policies are formulated. And as we can see here, it is about all of these things: reskilling, resizing, re-engineering, restructuring, and re-engaging citizens, reinventing processes, redesigning processes, or in summary, rethinking the entire system so that we can ensure efficient, effective, economical, and ethical use of vital public resources towards creating the policies and services that are expected by the citizens, and towards enhancing or restoring the trust of the public into the ability of government to provide for its needs, to use well the country's resources, and to take care of their well-being. So let me just end by quoting what the OECD, or a similar organization for developed countries, is thinking about productivity. And They say that boosting productivity is not so much about working harder as working smarter, as it reflects our ability to produce more output by better combining inputs based on new ideas, technological breakthroughs, and business models. So, thank you.